Another UN school struck in Gaza, killing more than a dozen Palestinians trying to take shelter from the war. The UN blamed Israeli incoming fire and told NBC News it has proof, including pieces of Israeli artillery rounds that rained down. Israel says it's investigating, but has previously said militants have fired on Israeli forces from near UN schools and stored weapons inside them.
NBC's Richard Engel reporting today on another rocket striking a UN school in Gaza. The UN Relief Agency says that this is the 6th time one of their schools has been struck. I'm joined now by Christopher Gunness, spokesperson for the UN Relief and Works Agency. Thank you very much, Mr. Gunness, for being with us. You've been tweeting actively about this.
My pleasure, Andrea, my pleasure.
This is just horrific. What do we know about the source of the rocket fire that hit the school today?
Well, first of all, let me say that we notified the Israeli army of the exact position of this school and the fact that there were 3,300 people there, precisely 17 times, 17 times. And in spite of that, it is clear from our initial investigation that it was Israeli artillery that hit the school and caused all of these deaths. Now, don't forget that these are people who had already been told by that same Israeli army to abandon their homes in northern Gaza, to walk through a battlefield and get out of harm's way. They did that, and they came to a UN sanctuary expecting safe haven. What happens? The artillery from that self-same army crashes into the building, and the consequences were absolutely tragic.
At this stage, what communication do you have with the Israeli army? Because they, of course, say that there's artillery fire coming, that they're returning fire into this kind of a very dense area, and that these kinds of civilian losses are tragic, apparently unavoidable from their perspective. I don't know even how to describe this kind of conflict anymore that we've been seeing.
Well, you're quite right, Andrea. It is very hard to comprehend why in one of the most densely populated parts of the world we're having this high-intensity warfare. But make no mistake about it, first of all, there is no evidence that there were militants in our school, and there's certainly no evidence that there were rockets in that school. And there is, in international law, the principle of distinction. Combatants and non-combatants have got to be distinguished. There's also the question of proportionality. If you're going to kill perhaps one militant or not very many, to put at risk 3,300 people is highly questionable. So the question for us is, parties to this conflict have an international law obligation to respect civilian life, to respect the sanctity of civilian life, to respect the inviolability of UN premises and property, and to respect their international humanitarian law obligations to protect humanitarian workers. We've already lost five of my colleagues have been killed in this war. Most organizations would have pulled out, but because we've got over 200,000 people in 83 shelters across the Gaza Strip, they're overflowing with people. There are terrible problems of sanitation. We've got to get food, blankets, water, all sorts of sanitary items to these schools. We will not abandon the people of Gaza, but we have reached breaking point. We will soon have a situation where tens of thousands of people, if they continue to leave their homes in the streets of Gaza without food, without water, without shelter, serious chances that communicable diseases will break out. This is beyond UNRWA, I'm afraid to say. We've reached breaking point. It's time for the parties to this conflict to accept their responsibilities to the civilians caught up in this conflict.
And I know that you have acknowledged that at empty schools, 3 empty schools, some rockets were found, and that you inspect these and notify the Israelis. So you've been proactively, the UN says, going after these incidents, but that does not justify what happens to the schools that are being used as shelters. I know that we have a slight satellite delay, but I also wanted to share with our viewers. I wanted to share with our viewers some of your tweets, which have been so profoundly moving. You've been tweeting, "Children killed in their sleep. This is an affront to all of us, a source of universal shame. Today the world stands disgraced." So it doesn't even if you set aside who's at fault here, who started it, who responded, your point is someone has to stop this.
And my point is that Gaza represents a catastrophic failure of the entire international system. This war didn't come out of nowhere. This is the third time in the last 5 years that we have seen an extraordinary outburst of violence, and it is outrageous and unsustainable in our view that 6 million Israeli civilians should be terrorized by rockets every few years, and it's equally unsustainable that 2 million people in Gaza should be subjected to this terrible bombardment that they're now going through. That's why we say that when the last drop of blood has been spilled and when the last gun has fallen silent, and I pray that will happen immediately, there must be serious international engagement with addressing the underlying causes of the conflict in Gaza, and that has to include the blockade itself, because unless that happens, the risk is that in 2 years' time exactly the same thing will happen again. And that, Andrea, is precisely why I say that Gaza represents a catastrophic failure of all of us.
Indeed. We all have to take responsibility for this. We've covered it for years. Mr. Gunness, thank you, and our condolences to all involved, and thank you for your service.
Thank you so much.